Good morning everyone and welcome to session 4 of EDN113. This week I will not be joining you in the workshops, although the workshops are going ahead as planned. Instead I will be recording some slides and a discussion on WebQuest and the use of rubrics with you. Before we start, let's just do acknowledgement of country. We acknowledge that the Wujab people of the Noongar Nation is the traditional custodians of this country and its waters, and that Murdoch University stands upon the Noongar country. We pay our respects for the Noongar elders, past, present, and acknowledge their wisdom, advice, and teaching and cultural knowledge activities. So for this week, due to isolation, I will not be attending the workshop. However, it is important for you to note that the workshops will proceed as normal and that the following teachers will be taking the classes on my behalf. Our Wednesday class will be Stephen and Thursday class will be Brigitte. This week you will start preparing for assignment 2, so it is vital that you attend the workshop, or if you, like me, are unable to do so due to health reasons, then please join the class via your Teams group channel so that you are able to work with your group members on the preparation of assignment 2. So this week we're standing still at topic 4, which is WebQuest inquiry-based approaches. My primary focus is to explain to you what WebQuest inquiry-based approach is and why you should use it, what rubrics is and why we use that. So what is a WebQuest? A WebQuest is the idea of question design by Bernie Dodge in 1990s. The idea behind it is that it would be a way for teachers to pull together the most pertinent resources for any given task so that the students are not just spending a lot of time going onto the web to look for the relevant resources, but instead the primary focus will be on what the students do with these set resources. So what this means is that in your role as teachers, you would select the most relevant resources for the given task so that the key focus falls on the task you're designing for your students. So in the context of assignment 2, it is all about getting students to design a comic or an animation. So what you will then need to do is equip them with the information that they need in order to design said comic or animation that is targeted at a particular group, and effectively communicate the key messages about the topic and that you have assigned them to do, which could be about privacy, cyberbullying, copyright, plagiarism, netiquette, any of those. So the focus here is on the inquiry-based learning, meaning that it is about the students being involved in the investigation and adopting a problem-solving approach to teaching. This means that you need to identify the problem, what is relevant to the students. For example, there might be a number of students that found their accounts been hacked. So the idea here is that you would want to use that as a teaching point and get the students then to develop a comic or an animation to educate their peers about what preventions they could take or what steps they can take in order to ensure that that doesn't happen to them. And of course, through this process, you are actively engaging the students because they are reading the web-based content that you've asked them to read with the intent of them using that content to inform the design of their comic or animation, so that they will learn more about, say, privacy, cyberbullying, copyright, plagiarism, netiquette, as they will be exploring the resources that you've made accessible for them through the WebQuest, and then they will ask each other questions about it and to formulate their understanding of these resources. It's possible that they might share some of their own ideas because they have some prior knowledge or prior experience with regards to the topic, and that what happens is that they then apply whatever they've learned about the said topic, whether it's privacy, cyberbullying, copyright, or any of the others to a different context. And this context is that they need to create a comic or an animation to educate others. So they're making meaning of what they've learned about the topic and the understanding of how it works in the real world, in a real world context, especially within a comic or an animation, because they will have to decide what the real world context is, who the characters are, what the key message will be, and what the storyline is. So what happens is that it goes beyond just copy and pasting of information. A WebQuest thus helps to primarily sort through resources to make sure that time is effectively used for gaining knowledge and to preclude the possibility of students engaging in substantive copy and pasting activities where they just copy information from the internet and placing it into an essay. The very fact that they have to design a comic and animation means that they really do need to analyze the articles or videos or even comics that you've made accessible to them, and then think about how that applies to the comic or animation that they intend to design. And therefore it requires critical and creative thinking, because they have to evaluate the information you've provided them with, and they then have to synthesize the information that's relevant to their comic or animation based on the target audience and the key message that they want to convey. So according to Holland, Johnson and Mara, a well-designed WebQuest incorporates cooperative learning so that students have to work with a partner or in a group to make sure that the end product is excellent. That they need to fulfill the expectations or criteria that's been set based on the rubric you've been supplied with that incorporates multiple perspectives. So for example, you can get them to look at any sort of situation within the comics or animation to look at maybe a cyberbullying case from a different perspective, from the perspective of a teacher or a parent, or maybe even the bully or the victim, so that they can better appreciate what's going on. The complexity of that particular context and the interactions within the context is not just for the purpose of analyzing it, but it is for the purpose of using this information to create an original project that demonstrates their understanding of the given topic. So how is a WebQuest structured? A WebQuest has five sections, and they are introduction, task, process, evaluation, and conclusion. So let us talk about each section on their own. So for the introduction section, you need to develop a scenario or set a context to engage your students. That means that you need to create a book that would be interesting to your particular year level. For example, for younger students, you might create an animated character to introduce the topic, or you might get them to watch an animation or read a comic itself. Or maybe for older children or young adults, you might prepare reading an article or get them to watch a video clip. So in this section, you need to think about what appeals to the target audience, so that each group that this WebQuest is targeted for can see how important this topic is and the relevance to their lives, so that they would want to continue learning about the topic. The next section is the task. Here you pretty much have to, and this is standardized across all of your WebQuest. You need to provide a summary of what the students will have to do in order to create the comic or animation. In this section, you do not provide the step-by-step details, only a summary of that gives the students the big picture, stating that they are expected to engage in a series of activities, and then after that they are expected to design and create a comic and animation. You need to make sure that this aligns with both your introduction as well as the process. The next section will be the process section. In this section, you will spell out the details or steps that they need to take and the activities and the resource they need to work through. So if you look at some WebQuests designed by previous cohorts, in some of them you can see that there is a developmental approach. So they begin, for example, by getting students to activate their prior knowledge, think about what they know about the topic of your choosing, and then maybe get them to engage in a recorded discussion or a brainstorm, a collaborative brainstorm on Padlet, for example, or you can do a quiz. And the next few activities would be where you provide them with some resources, such as videos or articles, and get them to read through it. They then can have a discussion within their groups about their understanding and their takeaways from the particular resource, and then a follow-up with an activity, perhaps a game, that will provide further information about the topic, for example, cyberbullying. The next step is to provide them resources to help them understand how to use the software or digital tool that they need to use to create their comic or animation. And then lastly, you will give them time to design an animation or a comic as their end product. All links and resources should be included, and the instructions must be very clear. Next, you have the evaluation page. On the evaluation page, you'll have to provide a copy of the rubric that you're going to use to evaluate your students' comic strips or animations. You could have just a rubric for you to mark them, or you could have two rubrics if they're working in groups. You could have one that's actually helping them peer review each other, and one then where you are going to evaluate their end products. So lastly, you have the conclusion. In this section, you are celebrating their accomplishments. You may provide students with a certificate of acknowledgement for the work they have done. That is totally up to you how you are going to phrase this and celebrate their accomplishment. Please make sure that you put your references at the bottom of each page. So for all the resources that you use on each page, whether it's videos, articles, images, websites, all of them need to be referenced in APA style referencing at the bottom of each of these pages. Okay, next up, let's talk about what is a rubric and what is the purpose of a rubric. So let's look at rubrics. Howard Johansson and Mara says that it's a set of rating scales for a series of elements reflecting different levels and types of expected performance. Now, if you look at this image here, you can see that this is an analytical rubric, which means that you've got a set of tasks or criteria that the students will be marked upon, and you have different levels of performance. If you look at that criteria, the criteria needs to be explicit and clear. Students need to understand exactly what they are being assessed on, and the levels of performance needs to be clear because students need to be able to distinguish between what it means to be a beginner and what does it mean to be exemplary. So I generally always say to students the easiest way to create a rubric will be to start with your lowest and your highest levels, and then you can extrapolate from there what the middle levels would be when you look at the performance levels for mastery. So how do we use rubrics? It is essential to use it as a guide for student actions so that every student will be aware on how they are being evaluated and what will inform their focus. It will help students to pay attention and put effort into the things that they are being assessed upon with regards to particular criteria that you have identified for them. Let's say, for example, you're awarding less marks for the aesthetic or design of the comic itself and more marks for the message communicated then the students will know to spend more time on the content of the comic and less on the design. The rubric supports systemic assessment to the extent to which your learners are able to address the criteria or evaluate a complex set of learning processes. The idea behind systemic assessment is linked to scaffolding, and it supports your thinking of how much help the students require in order to be successful in completing this task. Assessments and feedback go hand in hand. So if you determine that there is a lot of the sections of the assessment that needs feedback, then put opportunities in place to assess them, such as group discussions, brainstorm activities, group mind maps. It could even be a game if you can find one that aligns with your topic and provides scores. This will provide you with opportunities to observe and see if they truly understand the topic and whether they are both individually and as a group participating and contributing to the group assessment. But you have to be careful. The whole idea behind this is not to have assessment after assessment, but strategic assessment to form the scaffolding so that they reach the final stage where they can be asked to complete the final task, creating a comic or an animation. They have already mastered the content and they are familiar with the information that will inform and the design of their comic and animation. And lastly, the rubric provides information on the learner's performance for the purpose of improving performance. So the idea here is to use rubrics to show students what they have done and what they need to improve on. You might find that some teachers use the same rubric all year round. For example, for writing conventions, by using the same rubric, students can then over time see how they've improved because they are being assessed against the same set of criteria. What is the characteristics of an effective rubric? It means that the criteria is comprehensive. So that's the section here on the left. It's comprehensive, meaning that the criteria itself needs to provide enough information for them to understand how they will be evaluated, what they will be evaluated on. The criterion itself should not be too complex for the students to understand. It needs to be simple enough for them to be able to understand how they are being assessed, but it doesn't have to be broken down into component parts. The rating scale levels need to be clearly defined with significant description, meaning that they need to be able to clearly see the difference between the expectations for the different levels. These rating scales should cover a range of expected performances. The rubric should also provide space for feedback to inform them on how they can improve in future learning. So if we now go and take a look at the rubric for assignment 2, you will see this is the rubric for the group wiki, made out of 5 different levels of performance and 3 categories here. The first criteria, we're looking at the content is meaningful, engaging, substantive, well organized, and appropriate for the selected year group. So when you look at that and you look at the description within the levels, you can see that for credit, it is the task description is adequate and engaging. The process is described in sufficient detail, and this links to a few internet resources and the resources provide fairly substantial information, and the resources are of some relevance to the target audience. There is an alignment between the task, the process, and the evaluation. So we will be looking at all 5 of your pages when we look at this section. Then you have your WebQuest presentation and language. Here we are looking at the design of your WebQuest, we're looking at your visuals, we're looking at spelling and grammar, and how clearly you convey the message. And then lastly, we have attributions, acknowledgements of others' work. In this section, we will look at whether you have clear acknowledgement of others' works, all your resources are being referenced, and that you are using APA 7th edition style referencing. So that brings us at the end of today's recording. Please make sure that you do go to class this week. I am looking forward to be back in class next week. Everything of the best for everyone.